His Three Daughters is currently streaming on Netflix. This is a family drama starring Carrie Coon, Elizabeth Olsen, and Natasha Lyonne, and they star as three estranged, dysfunctional sisters who converge on their family home to care for their terminally ill father as he draws his last breath. I gotta say, I love this film. Now, this is heavy in dialogue. It's a talkie, but the dialogue moves the narrative. It moves the story along, and it doesn't only move the story along, it's also a deep dive of the respective characters. Carrie Coon plays the oldest sister. Elizabeth Olsen plays the middle child, but she projects as the youngest. And Natasha Lyonne plays the stepsister, but she was adopted by their dad, who sees her as his very own blood child. And they each have their own distinct personalities, and the dialogue helps to convey how each of them had their own separate relationships with their dad, and it just shows who they were without doing any flashbacks, and how this relationship with their father shaped who they are now and shaped the dynamic they each have with each other. This was directed by Azazel Jacobs. I love her aesthetic. Although most of this story takes place in this New York apartment, because of the dialogue and the exposition, it feels a lot broader. It feels contained, but it also feels broader because a lot of what we're learning about the characters, it feels like we understand their lives outside of their family home. We know how they were as kids and how they are as adults. So although a lot of it is in this one apartment, which feels very noirish, like New York in the fall, it also feels big enough, like a big tent, because we know how they live in the world based on their dialogue. There are monologues in here that are some of the best we've seen in a very long time, especially the opening dialogue that Carrie Coon delivers. It just puts a perspective on where we're going in the story. This is lit too. Like every piece of this movie tells the story, how it is lit, the blunt cuts. Like there are edits that go, it's not every scene, but a lot of the scenes have these blunt cuts that have humor in it because we're talking about the imminent death of their father and they've already lost their mothers. So this is what they have left. They are estranged, so they won't have each other and they won't have their dad. So the blunt cuts add to the humor because a lot of this is heaviness. This is a family drama, and this is what happens with the business of death and burying and preparing with a relative or a parent that is dying with hospice and preparing last rites and so forth. So there's the business of that. But most of this is about the dynamic of these sisters. What's going to happen when their father passes on? Are they going to continue to be estranged? It's such a portrait how the dialogue is written. It's written so well. There's so many layers. There's so much subtext that contributes to the story too. The dialogue is their interaction with each other, and we get to know so much of them. It's as if we know it. We know what's going on. Like it's not over exposition. They're not over explaining the dynamic. They're having a conversation and we just so happen to be there, as if we are in group therapy and they're sharing their story, and they share it in a way that they are like siblings do, where they are sharing it in a way that they want the person listening to be on their side. That's sibling rivalry, and that's just the dynamics of having siblings, even though they had been estranged for at least a year. And their father, played by J.O. Sanders, has been he's stricken with cancer and is on really his last few hours. And we don't see him for most of the film, which worked. And I'm glad we see him in the third act, but we don't see him for most of the film because up until that point, this doesn't have to include him, because when siblings are having a disagreement and the parent interjects, the parent sometimes can take a side. So I like that that J.O. Sanders character, he plays Vincent or Vinny, he stays hooked up to the machine, dying. He is, like I said, on his last breath. And so they are figuring it out on their own. And Natasha Lyonne because she is the adoptive sister who has been taking care of their dad while the other two, Carrie Coon and Elizabeth Olsen's character, they living their lives with their families. She's been caring for their dad. And Natasha Lyonne, her boyfriend, is played by Jovan Adepo. There is, and let me tell you, he clocks Carrie and he clocks Elizabeth. And oftentimes I'll tell you, this is what Black people do. It was such a Black thing that he clocks them and says the thing that Natasha's character can't say. And as an outsider who feels a part of the family dynamic that Natasha Lyonne's character built, because has been cool with her father, with Vinny, watching the games and so forth, and has been accepted by him, that he feels he needs to say this because they have been treating her like an outsider when she has been there since she was 4 years old because her mom had died. So I love that he clocks them and says what we, the audience, the viewer, would want to say, because they all really need, especially at this moment in their lives, to really be together. I love that. Natasha has been there the whole time, but because she's adoptive, she doesn't have to explain what she's done, because that's not even the point. She did it because she loves him, and that is her father, and she doesn't have to prove that to them. That's the dynamic that I understood it to be. And there's a point in the third act where Vincent manifests in a way that is not explained when you see him. He comes out as if he is healed, but his purpose was really important. As I said, when siblings, adult siblings, I should say, are having a disagreement, I feel like it is important for the parent to remain neutral and by that stay out of it, because the parents have a different dynamic than sisters. How it should be is that siblings outlast parents. I know that doesn't always happen. And so siblings are going to be together longer than they'll be with their parents. So I feel like parents shouldn't interject. But he does, because it's necessary for him to understand his blessing for his family. He needs them to come together because they're no longer going to have parents. They're only going to have each other. And yes, Carrie Coon's character and Elizabeth Olsen's character have kids. They have, a husband. They each have a husband. That's not the point. The sister bond that he has to enforce upon them is important as he draws his last breath. And so he manifests in this moment to let them understand what they couldn't have possibly understood because they were kids. They didn't understand why he adopted Natasha's character and why it's so important for her to be recognized as his very own daughter. And he shares, why he's such a good dad, because he didn't have one. Like, what he explains is very important as he draws his last breath. They have to know this. And so I like that he interjects when he does to explain that they will really only have each other and that they need to stick together. His manifesting in that very moment is so pivotal, because the weeds have been growing in the dynamic and relationship and dysfunction of these siblings. And when he manifests, he is yanking the weeds out of the soil so that they can grow closer and stronger together when he is no longer with them. And I've just found that so touching and purposeful that he manifests in this way. And I wasn't sure if he was just a dream or if they were like imagining this. But after that scene, their bond is stronger because they thought the only commonality they shared was that they have this man in their life, their father, and that their moms had died when they were kids. That's the only commonality they think they have. And he comes to let them know that you are more alike than you think. And that's important for their relationship as they grieve and as they grow together. I loved that scene. The title is His Three Daughters. So I think it was important for him to show up at some point. I liked when he wasn't on screen. We knew he was in his room and that he was, in hospice care and his death was imminent. But not having him walking around and interjecting and forcing them to feel something too soon, I think was a good decision. I loved this movie. Director Azazel Jacobs does a fantastic job. The lighting's good, the music's good, even the set design with the flowers that are still, you don't see them watering them, but you see that there's life in them. There's life in this apartment. There's love in this apartment, though it's small, though New York City is right outside. There's life here, and the girls need to recognize that they were raised in love. And although they lost their mother, the father was always there. This is such a beautiful story. It's a great way to portray a talkie because, again, it is heavy in dialogue, but dialogue that is very distinct and purposeful, very economical. Nothing is said that doesn't matter. Every word that they say contributes, helps the viewer get to know the character without being so on the nose. You get to know each distinct character. Listen, this is a fantastic movie. This is a beautiful portrait of grief and sibling rivalry, really, and family dysfunction and dynamics, especially as we go into the holiday season. I enjoyed it. The performances were stellar. I think as an ensemble, I think the three of them should be nominated for Best Supporting Actress, in my opinion. They each have just such a distinct uniqueness about themselves that just felt like home, especially if you have siblings. It just felt so familiar and familial in a way that this was like a group therapy session or, like at Thanksgiving, it felt like. Um, I loved it. I highly recommend His Three Daughters. It's currently streaming on Netflix.